Discipline does not disappear because you are weak. It disappears because comfort keeps negotiating with your future, and most people keep letting comfort win. You can want a better life in the morning and still betray it by the afternoon, not because you do not know what to do. Knowing is not discipline. Discipline begins when your actions stop depending on your mood, your energy level, your comfort, or whether the world around you is cooperating. It begins when you do what must be done not because you feel like it, but because you decided who you are going to be, and that decision is larger than how you feel today. The Stoics understood this with a precision that still holds. They were not interested in motivation that surges and fades. They were interested in character, the kind of inner structure that produces consistent behavior regardless of circumstance, regardless of how inspired or exhausted or discouraged the person carrying it happens to feel on a given day. That is what this episode is about. Not 10 tricks for being more productive, not a system that works until the first difficult week. 10 principles for building the kind of self-discipline that is grounded in something real. In purpose, in self-command, in the daily practice of doing what you said you would do, especially when everything in you would rather not. These principles do not require perfection. They require honesty and repetition. That is all discipline has ever required. Principle 1. Find a purpose. Strong enough to defeat your excuses. Self-discipline does not begin with a better schedule. It begins with a reason strong enough to survive discomfort. This is the foundation that most conversations about discipline skip, because it is less satisfying than a productivity system and harder to manufacture than a morning routine. But without it, every technique eventually collapses. Not because the technique was wrong, but because the reason underneath it was not strong enough to carry the weight of a difficult day. Think about what actually happens when discipline fails. It rarely fails in the moments of highest difficulty. It fails in the ordinary moments, the afternoon when you are tired and the easier choice is right there. The morning when the alarm goes off and nothing about the day feels urgent. The evening when the work is technically optional and rest is perfectly available. In those moments, what determines whether you continue is not willpower in the abstract. It is the strength of the reason behind the effort. The Stoics built their entire philosophy around the idea of living in alignment with your deepest nature and your highest values. For them, the question was, not how do I force myself to do difficult things, but what am I actually living for? And does the way I spend my days reflect that? When the answer to that question is clear and personally significant, discipline becomes less about fighting yourself and more about honoring a direction you have genuinely chosen. The practical work here is honest examination, not what sounds like a good reason, what actually moves you. What, when you imagine abandoning it, produces something close to grief rather than relief? What, when you imagine achieving it, feels like it would have been worth the cost? That answer, specific, personal, emotionally real, is the foundation that discipline needs to stand on. Write it down, not in vague language about wanting to improve or wanting to be better, in the specific, honest language of what this actually means to you. The clearer and more personal the reason, the more resistant it becomes to the arguments comfort will make on its own behalf. Comfort is persuasive. It speaks in the language of reasonableness, of rest, of just this once. A strong enough purpose can answer those arguments directly. A vague one cannot. If your reason is vague, your discipline will be vague. If your reason is strong, the excuses will still come, but they will have something to argue against. Return to it regularly, not just when you are struggling, but before the struggle arrives. The reason needs to be refreshed, revisited, kept alive in the way that any important thing requires maintenance. A reason examined once and then filed away gradually loses its force. A reason returned to daily becomes the fixed point that everything else orients around. If this episode is giving you something real, leave a like. It helps this reach someone else who is trying to build something that lasts. Stay with me, because the next principles go deeper. Principle 2. Count on yourself before you expect life to support you. A disciplined person stops waiting to be motivated before beginning, stops waiting for the right circumstances to feel supportive before committing, stops waiting for someone else to notice, to push, to remind, to validate the effort before it continues. Not because help is unwelcome, but because a life organized around waiting for external support is a life that will spend most of its time waiting. The Stoics called this inner command, the recognition that your actions, your reactions, your habits and your growth are ultimately yours to govern. Not because the external world has no influence on you, it clearly does, but because the part that can be trained, the part that can be changed, the part that produces a different life over time, that part is entirely internal. And treating it as though it depends on external conditions is one of the most reliable ways to ensure it never fully develops. There is a version of this principle that sounds harsh. Pull yourself up, stop making excuses, nobody is coming to save you. That version is not what is being said here. What is being said is something quieter and more practical. The moment you stop organizing your discipline around what the outside world is or is not providing, you become dramatically more consistent. Because the outside world is unreliable. Moods shift, support disappears, circumstances change, enthusiasm from others fades. The internal commitment either holds or it does not, and whether it holds depends on whether it was ever truly yours or whether it was always borrowed from the energy of the environment around you. This is why people who seem disciplined in one environment often struggle when that environment changes. The gym partner stops coming, the accountability group dissolves, the streak breaks, and suddenly the discipline that looked solid reveals itself to have been partly outsourced. Building discipline that is genuinely yours means building it from the inside. It means doing the work on the days when no one is watching, when no one will know, when there is no external consequence for stopping. It means keeping promises to yourself, not because someone is holding you accountable, but because you are someone who keeps promises to yourself. That standard, practiced consistently, becomes a form of self-respect that no external condition can fully provide. Take the responsibility seriously, not as a burden, as a form of respect for your own capacity. The discipline you are building is yours. It does not require the world's cooperation to exist. And when support does arrive, when someone does notice, when the environment does cooperate, when external circumstances make the effort easier, receive it gratefully without becoming dependent on it. Use it as additional fuel, not as the engine itself. The engine has to be internal. When it is, everything else becomes a bonus rather than a requirement. Principle 3. Show up daily, especially when it feels ordinary. Most people can be disciplined when the moment feels significant. The first day of something new, the day after a powerful conversation, the morning when motivation is genuinely high and the goal feels close and real. These days are not where discipline lives. These days are easy. What they require is not discipline. It is enthusiasm, which is a different and far less reliable resource. discipline lives on the ordinary day, the Tuesday with no particular meaning, the morning when you slept poorly and nothing about the task feels rewarding, the stretch of weeks when the effort is real, but the progress is invisible. These are the days that build the character the Stoics were interested in, not the dramatic moments of commitment, but the quiet accumulation of showing up when showing up requires something from you. Marcus Aurelius returned to this in his private writing with a consistency that is itself instructive. Day after day, in writings never intended for public view, he reminded himself of the same principles, not because he had not understood them, but because understanding is not the same as embodiment. The principles needed to be renewed daily, applied daily, tested daily. The character he was building was not built in a single act of commitment. It was built in the repetition of small acts, each one ordinary, each one contributing something to a structure that only became visible over time. This is what distinguishes the person who eventually builds something real from the person who keeps starting over. Not talent, not even effort in the abstract. The willingness to treat the ordinary day as worthy of the same standard as the significant one. To bring the same commitment to the Tuesday that barely registers as to the Monday that felt like a turning point. If you examine the lives of people who built genuine discipline over time, what you find is not a series of dramatic decisions. You find unremarkable consistency, the same time, the same practice, the same standard, repeated across hundreds of ordinary days until it became less a discipline and more simply the way they lived. The dramatic moments are visible, the ordinary ones that produced them are not. But those are the ones that did the actual work. The practical implication is simple and demanding. Remove the condition that the day must feel right before the discipline is real. The day does not need to feel right. It needs to be lived. The work does not need to feel important in the moment. It needs to be done. The standard you are holding yourself to does not need to feel inspiring today. It needs to be honored today, in the ordinary hours, with the ordinary energy available, without waiting for something exceptional to make it easier. The discipline that only shows up for the significant days will always be inconsistent. The discipline that shows up for the ordinary ones becomes unbreakable. There is a particular satisfaction available on the ordinary days that the significant ones rarely produce. The quiet, private knowledge that you did what was required without needing the day to be exceptional. That kind of consistency, accumulated over time, becomes the foundation of a self-respect that no external achievement can fully provide. Because it was built in the hours when no one was watching and nothing was making it easy. Principle 4. Practice discomfort before life forces it on you. Comfort is not the enemy of discipline. Comfort as a master is. There is nothing wrong with comfort as an experience, with rest, with ease, with the pleasure of a life that is not constantly difficult. The problem begins when comfort becomes the standard by which every decision is made. When the first question before any action is not, is this right, or is this necessary, but is this comfortable, the will begins to weaken in ways that are gradual and almost invisible until they are not. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship deliberately. Seneca wrote about periodically choosing to live simply, eating plainly, dressing without luxury, reducing comfort deliberately, not as punishment, but as training. The point was not to suffer. The point was to prove to himself, through direct experience, that the removal of comfort did not remove his capacity to function, that the things he enjoyed were things he could live without, and knowing that changed his relationship to them entirely. He could enjoy them fully without being controlled by them. The same principle applies to the small daily discomforts that discipline requires. Waking earlier than feels natural, staying with a difficult task past the point where distraction becomes attractive, choosing the useful thing over the easy thing when both are available. These are not heroic acts. They are practices, small repeated experiences of choosing discomfort voluntarily that train the nervous system to stop treating discomfort as an emergency. What this produces over time is a different relationship with difficulty, not immunity to it, but the accumulated knowledge from direct experience that difficulty is survivable, that the discomfort of the hard choice passes, that the person on the other side of it is slightly more capable than the one who avoided it. That knowledge, built up through repetition, is what allows discipline to continue operating in genuinely difficult conditions, because it has been tested in smaller ones often enough that the nervous system no longer treats challenge as a reason to stop. The person who has never voluntarily chosen discomfort is also the person who is most disrupted when life makes the choice for them, because the experience of difficulty, without the prior evidence that it is survivable, feels like a genuine emergency rather than an inconvenience. Voluntary hardship, practiced in small ways consistently, is what builds the internal evidence that keeps that reaction proportionate. You do not need to make this dramatic. The small choices are enough. The cold shower instead of the warm one, the stairs instead of the elevator, the conversation you have been avoiding instead of the distraction that feels easier. None of these is heroic. All of them train something real, and the accumulation of those trained responses is what determines how you function when the difficulty is no longer voluntary. Principle 5. Control what is yours and stop bleeding energy into what is not. One of the quietest ways discipline erodes is through misplaced attention. The energy that should be going toward effort, toward skill development, toward the daily work of becoming more capable, gets diverted into managing things that were never within reach to begin with. The opinion that person has of you, the outcome of something that depends on factors outside your influence, the timing of things that have their own schedule, regardless of your anxiety about them, the behavior of people whose choices are ultimately not yours to govern. Epictetus, who built his entire philosophy from a position of having no external freedom at all, was precise about this. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. Within our power are our judgments, our intentions, our responses, our character. Outside our power, our reputation, outcomes, and the behavior of everyone who is not us. The discipline of distinguishing between these two categories consistently and honestly is one of the most practically powerful things a person can develop. Because the energy is finite, the attention available on any given day has a ceiling, and a person who spends significant portions of that energy on what cannot be controlled arrives at the actual work depleted, with less left for the effort, the focus, the persistence that producing something real requires, the anxiety about outcomes not yet determined, the preoccupation with how the work will be received before it has been done, the energy spent managing others' perceptions rather than developing the actual capability. All of this is a drain with no return. Returning attention to what is genuinely yours is not resignation. It is not indifference to outcomes. It is the recognition that the most reliable path to good outcomes is investing fully in what you can actually influence, and releasing, as cleanly as possible, the preoccupation with everything else. In practice, this means noticing when the anxiety or the frustration is about something genuinely within your control, in which case the energy belongs in direct action, and when it is about something that is not. in which case the energy is being wasted. The redirection is not always easy, but it is always available, and the discipline of making it consistently is one of the most significant ways a person can increase the effectiveness of their effort without adding a single additional hour to it. The Stoics called this the returning of attention, the ongoing practice of pulling focus back from what is external and beyond reach to what is internal and genuinely available. It is not a single decision. It is a daily practice. Each time you catch yourself spending energy on what cannot be changed and redirect it toward what can be, you are practicing one of the most fundamental forms of Stoic discipline. If this episode is building something useful for you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The second half of these principles is where the real character work begins. Principle 6. Refuse the victim mindset without denying your pain. This principle requires care because it is easy to misstate in a way that dismisses something real. Stoicism does not ask you to pretend that life is easy, that injustice does not exist, that pain is not real, or that difficulty is always your fault. Life is genuinely hard in ways that are sometimes genuinely unfair. Pain is real. Loss is real. Some circumstances are objectively more difficult than others, and acknowledging that is not weakness, it is honesty. What Stoicism does ask is something different and more specific, that after acknowledging the pain, you return to the question of what is still yours to choose, not what should have happened, not what the world owes you, not what would be different if things had gone differently, but here, now, with these actual circumstances, what remains within your authority. The victim mindset is not defined by having been hurt. It is defined by the conclusion that having been hurt removes the responsibility and the capacity to respond. It locates the source of the problem entirely outside, and then, because the outside is not changing fast enough, locates the solution entirely outside as well. And in doing so, it surrenders the one thing that was always available regardless of what happened, the choice of what to do next. A disciplined person can hold both things at once. The pain is real, and what I do with it is still mine. The difficulty is genuine, and my response to it is still my responsibility. The injustice was real, and I am still the one who decides what kind of person I become on the other side of it. This is not toxic positivity. It is the refusal to let what happened to you have the final word about what you do from here. This distinction matters for discipline specifically because the victim mindset and the disciplined mindset are incompatible in a very practical sense. Discipline requires the belief that your actions make a difference, that the effort you invest today has a real relationship with the outcome you experience tomorrow. The moment you fully accept that what happens to you is determined entirely by forces outside your influence, the motivation to act with discipline collapses. Why develop the character, build the habit, do the difficult thing if it makes no real difference? The Stoic answer is, because the effort is yours, the character is yours, and the quality of how you live your life is not determined by the circumstances, but by how you meet them. Acknowledge what was hard, name what was unfair, feel what needs to be felt, and then ask, given all of this, given exactly where I am right now, what is still mine to do? That question, returned to honestly and consistently, is one of the most powerful things a person can practice, not because it erases what happened, but because it refuses to let what happened determine what happens next. And that refusal, practiced over time, becomes a form of freedom that no external circumstance can fully take away. Principle 7. Delay gratification. Before pleasure trains you to be weak. Discipline dies in small moments, not large ones. It dies in the extra scroll that becomes 20 minutes, in the delay that starts as 5 minutes and becomes the afternoon, in the easy choice made not because it was right, but because the alternative required more than felt available in that moment. Each of these decisions is individually trivial. Collectively, they are an education, and the lesson they teach is that relief is more important than growth, that impulse deserves obedience, that the discomfort of waiting is intolerable. The Stoics called temperance one of the 4 cardinal virtues, not as moral judgment against pleasure, but as the recognition that a person ruled by appetite is not free. You can enjoy things fully without being controlled by them. But the capacity to enjoy without being controlled is not default. It is trained. And the training happens in the small moments of choosing to wait when immediate relief is available. Delayed gratification is not punishment. It is the practice of keeping the longer timeline in view when the shorter one is making its argument loudest. It is the decision that what you are building, the character, the skill, the life, is more important than the comfort available right now. Not always, not in every moment, but often enough, consistently enough, that the habit of choosing the longer view gradually becomes stronger than the habit of obeying the immediate one. There is also something worth understanding about what obedience to every impulse does to the mind over time. It is not neutral. Each time an impulse is obeyed without question, the threshold for the next impulse lowers slightly. The mind learns that immediate relief is always available, that discomfort does not have to be tolerated, that the feeling of wanting something is sufficient reason to act on it. These are lessons that compound over time in a direction that makes genuine discipline progressively harder to maintain. The reverse is equally true. Each time gratification is delayed, each time the impulse is noticed and not immediately obeyed, the threshold rises slightly. The mind learns that discomfort is tolerable, that wanting something does not require acting on it immediately, that the longer view is a real option. These are also lessons that compound, and the person who has practiced them consistently carries a different relationship with their own impulses than the one who has not. The practical application is not dramatic. It requires noticing the moments when impulse is making the decision rather than intention, and choosing in those moments, often enough to build a track record, to let intention win. Start small and specific. Identify one area where impulse is currently running the show: the phone, the food, the distraction, the postponed task, and practice the delay there first. Not permanently, not absolutely, but consistently enough that a different habit begins to form. The aim is not to become someone who never enjoys anything. It is to become someone whose enjoyment is chosen rather than compelled. Principle 8. Protect your mind from voices that weaken your direction. Not every voice that enters your mind deserves equal weight. This principle is not about arrogance, about dismissing all criticism, surrounding yourself only with agreement, or refusing to hear anything that challenges your current direction. Some criticism is genuinely useful. Some feedback contains information you cannot get any other way. Some of the most valuable input available comes from people who care enough to say the hard thing honestly. The distinction the Stoics were interested in is more specific, between the voice that offers correction and the voice that offers doubt. Correction says, here is something specific that could be better. Here is a gap between what you are doing and what would serve you. Doubt says, who do you think you are? This probably will not work. People like you do not usually succeed at things like this. One of these is information. The other is noise wearing the clothes of wisdom. A disciplined mind learns to make this distinction consistently. It doesn't do so by rejecting all external input. That would cut off the genuine feedback that development requires. It does so by asking, of each voice that arrives with authority, is this person offering something that helps me become more capable and more honest? Or are they projecting their own fears and limitations onto my direction? Is this feedback about the work, or is it about the discomfort my ambition creates in someone who has made different choices? The voices that weaken direction are not always hostile. Sometimes they are well-meaning people who genuinely care, but whose picture of what is possible for you is smaller than the one you are working from. Protecting your direction from those voices is not ingratitude. It is the discipline of keeping your standard as yours, defined by your own honest assessment of what is possible and necessary, not by the comfort level of the people around you. Epictetus was direct about this. Be suspicious of the applause of the crowd as much as of its criticism. Both can pull you away from your own direction, one by inflating the wrong things, the other by deflating the right ones. The disciplined response to both is the same. Return to your own honest assessment of what the work requires, and let that be the primary measure. Over time, the discipline of filtering voices builds a cleaner relationship with your own judgment. You become less dependent on external signals, approval, criticism, attention, to tell you whether you are on the right track. The internal compass becomes more reliable, and a more reliable internal compass produces more consistent behavior, because the direction is no longer subject to constant renegotiation every time the external noise changes. Principle 9. Choose models that raise your standards. You are affected by what you study closely and what you spend time around, whether you intend to be or not. The Stoics took this seriously as a deliberate practice. They read about and reflected on figures they considered exemplary, not to copy them mechanically, but to allow proximity to a higher standard to raise their own. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to his teachers, to Epictetus, to the examples of people whose character he admired, because that sustained attention gradually shaped the standard by which he measured his own behavior. The principle is not that you need perfect role models, or that the people you study need to be without flaw. It is that the standard you hold yourself to is significantly influenced by what you consider normal and what you consider extraordinary. When the examples around you are people who have built genuine discipline, genuine integrity, genuine patience under difficulty, your sense of what is achievable and what is expected shifts upward. The ceiling of what feels normal rises. This applies to the content you consume, the conversations you spend time in, the people you choose to observe closely, not with the goal of comparison. Comparison used competitively tends to produce anxiety rather than growth, but with the goal of calibration, of asking regularly, is this example showing me something about what is possible that expands my sense of what I am capable of? Is this standard higher than the one I am currently holding myself to? The model does not have to be a historical figure or a famous person. It can be someone you know personally, someone in your immediate environment whose consistency, patience, or integrity you genuinely respect. The mechanism is the same. Sustained attention to how someone operates at a high standard gradually reshapes what you consider a reasonable expectation for yourself. The discipline this principle asks for is intentional. It requires choosing what you expose yourself to with some degree of awareness about what that exposure does to your standards, and being willing to reduce proximity to what consistently lowers them. Not every piece of content you consume, not every conversation you spend time in, is raising the bar. Some is quietly lowering it. Knowing the difference and acting on that knowledge is itself a form of discipline. The standard you hold yourself to is not fixed. It is in constant motion, shaped by what you repeatedly encounter and what you repeatedly give attention to. Choosing your models carefully is choosing the direction that motion takes. Principle 10. Review your day before the same weakness. Repeats tomorrow. Without reflection, discipline has no feedback loop. You can show up every day, put in real effort, maintain genuine commitment, and still repeat the same weaknesses, the same patterns of avoidance, the same moments where comfort won, indefinitely. Not because you lack the capacity to change them, but because without the honest examination of where they occurred, they remain invisible. And invisible patterns do not get corrected, they get repeated. The Stoics practiced evening review as a serious discipline, not a casual glance at the day, not a general feeling about whether things went well or poorly, but a specific and honest accounting. Where today did I act in alignment with my values, and where did I not? Where did I hold to my commitments, and where did I let them slip? Where did discomfort win when it should not have, and what was the actual moment it happened? Seneca described this practice in his own writing, the nightly examination of the day's actions, asking himself where he fell short and where he met the standard he was trying to hold. He was not performing this for anyone else. It was a private practice with a specific practical purpose, to ensure that the same failure did not repeat without being examined, that the gap between intention and behavior was seen clearly enough to be closed. The purpose of this review is not self-punishment. A review that produces only self-criticism generates shame rather than learning, and shame tends to produce avoidance rather than change. The purpose is precision, understanding specifically where the gap between intention and behavior occurred, so that tomorrow's effort can be more accurately directed. Over time, the evening review changes the texture of the day itself. When you know that the day will be examined honestly at its end, the decisions within it carry slightly more weight. The moment of choosing comfort over commitment is no longer fully private. It will be accounted for. That knowledge, held consistently, raises the standard of behavior during the day rather than merely after it. Ask honestly at the end of every day, where did I keep my word and where did I break it? Where did I act with the character I am trying to build, and where did I fall short of it? The answers, taken seriously and acted on, are how discipline becomes something more than an intention. They are how it becomes a life. 5 minutes of honest daily review, practiced consistently, will do more for your discipline over a year than any system, any productivity tool, or any surge of motivation, because it closes the loop that everything else depends on. It ensures that the effort of today is actually informing the direction of tomorrow, and it keeps the gap between who you intend to be and who you are actually being from quietly widening until it becomes too large to close. Discipline is not a feeling. It is not a burst of motivation that arrives on good days and disappears on difficult ones. It is a structure, built slowly through the daily practice of the principles this episode has covered. A strong enough purpose to survive the hard days, the willingness to count on yourself rather than wait for external conditions to support you, the commitment to show up on the ordinary days, not just the significant ones. The practice of choosing discomfort voluntarily before life makes the choice for you. The precision of knowing what is yours to control and releasing what is not. The refusal to surrender your agency to your circumstances. The discipline of making the longer view stronger than the immediate impulse. The careful management of what voices you allow to shape your direction. The intentional choice of standards that pull you upward. And the honest daily review that closes the gap between who you intended to be today and who you actually were. None of these principles works once. All of them work through repetition. The character they build is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It shows up in the accumulated difference between the person who kept going and the person who stopped, measured not in a single day, but across the months and years in which these principles were either practiced or abandoned. The Stoics were not interested in the version of you that performs discipline for an audience. They were interested in the version that practices it in private, on the ordinary days, with no one watching and nothing exceptional to make it easier. That version is what this episode was built for. Begin with one principle. Not all 10 simultaneously. That is a reliable way to begin nothing. Pick the one that landed most honestly. The one that pointed at the specific gap between where you are and where you want to be. Practice it this week with real consistency. Then add another. Let the structure build the way character actually builds. Gradually, through repetition, in the ordinary hours that add up to a life. If this episode gave you something useful, subscribe and follow the playlist in front of you now. And write discipline in the comments, not as a declaration, but as a quiet commitment to the standard you are choosing to hold.